When Napoleon and his troops stormed into Frankfurt, Germany, William feared for his life and his vast fortune. He left $3 million in the hands of Mayor Rothschild to pay the Hessian soldiers. Then he escaped to Denmark to stay with his royal relatives, all of whom were descendants of the tribe of Dan. Mayor Rothschild received a stock market tip from his World Revolutionary Network. Instead of paying the Hessian soldiers with the $3 million that was left to him by William, he bet the money on his insider stock market tip. With his new fortune, Mayor Rothschild set up 5 family banks to be run by each of his 5 sons in London, Paris, Naples, Frankfurt, and Vienna. On September 19, 1812, Mayor Rothschild died at the age of 68. He left instructions that the amount of the inheritance must never be made public, that secrecy and ruthlessness must be used in all business practices, and that family members must intermarry with their own blood relatives to keep the family fortune all in the family. All 5 brothers dedicated themselves to their ancestors' world revolutionary dream. That dream was to control the entire world under one world ruler by disarming the nations of the world. Mayor Rothschild's most successful sons were Nathan, who ran the London Bank, and James, who ran the Paris Bank. Together, they changed the face of history and became known throughout Europe as the Demon Brothers. Their father had given them a detailed New World Order plan for world control. Adam Weishaupt wrote and completed the plan on May 1st, 1776 with Rothschild financing. It was a futuristic plan that would put New World Order members over the next centuries into political power positions. It was a plan to divide and conquer the nations of the world by provoking wars, then profiting from war loans and from the sale of weapons to both sides. Exhausted by war, terror, and chaos, humanity would eventually bow down to one world ruler and one world army as a solution. Nathan and James Rothschild came up with a scheme that would put the Illuminati plan for world control into action. It would also make them filthy rich. The brothers helped finance both sides of Napoleon's famous Battle of Waterloo between the French and the English. With advanced knowledge of the British victory, Nathan Rothschild spread lies that the British had been defeated, which caused a stock market crash. While panicked English investors sold their life savings, Nathan bought up their market shares for pennies on the dollar. When official news of the British victory over Napoleon was announced, the English stock market skyrocketed, and so did Nathan's wealth. In one foul swoop, the Demon Brothers had double-crossed the English masses and taken control of the Bank of England. Flaunting their stupendous wealth, the brothers went on a lavish spending spree. They bought mansions, fashionable clothes, and hosted extravagant parties. According to plan, the brothers formed the world's first international bank and named it N.M. Rothschild and Sons. The Pope became their most famous customer. The Catholic Church, which had financed the wholesale slaughter, torture, and looting of hundreds of thousands of Muslims during the Christian Crusades, were now doing business with the Demon Brothers. By 1823, the Rothschilds were guardians of the entire papal treasure and took over the financial operations of the Catholic Church. Enraged citizens accused the Rothschilds of conspiring to control the world's money markets. Fearing for their lives, the Rothschilds retreated into the shadows and cast their eyes on the youthful United States of America. To avoid publicity, the Rothschilds made themselves invisible by creating and hiding behind 2 front companies, J.P. Morgan and Kuhn and Loeb.
More and more power was becoming concentrated in fewer and fewer hands. By 1906, J.P. Morgan's bank controlled 1/3 of America's railways and almost 70% of the steel industry. He eventually had a stake in the major companies of the 20th century, among them AT&T, ITT, General Electric, General Motors, and DuPont.
At one point, Morgan made the offhanded comment, "America is good enough for me." And the newspaper, William Jennings Bryan, retorted, "Whenever you're tired of it, you can give it back." I mean, that was the image of J.P. Morgan, the owner of the United States.
It is important to understand the difference between the term Jews, Hebrews, and Zionists. The majority of the world's Jewish population are honest, caring, honorable people who practice Judaism, follow religious tradition, and embrace good moral values. The term Hebrew refers to the Hebrew language. It also refers to the Hebrew people who are the ethnic descendants of the original 12 tribes of Israel. The term Zionist refers to political extremists. Zionists believe that the Hebrews are God's chosen race of people and that the Hebrews have a right to the land of the Muslim Palestinians.
Bernays is almost completely unknown today, but his influence on the 20th century was nearly as great as his uncle's. Because Bernays was the first person to take Freud's ideas about human beings and use them to manipulate the masses. He showed American corporations for the first time how they could make people want things they didn't need by linking mass-produced goods to their unconscious desires. Out of this would come a new political idea of how to control the masses. By satisfying people's inner selfish desires, one made them happy and thus docile. It was the start of the all-consuming self, which has come to dominate our world today.
I mean, democracy really, the idea of democracy at its heart was about changing the relations of power that had governed the world for so long. And Bernays' concept of democracy was one of maintaining the relations of power, even if it meant that one needed to sort of stimulate the psychological lives of the public. And in fact, in his mind, that was what was necessary. That if you can keep stimulating the irrational self, then leadership can basically go on doing what it wants to do.
Bernays now became one of the central figures in a business elite that dominated American society and politics in the 1920s.
People who worked for him were stupid, and children were stupid, and if people did things in a way that he wouldn't have done them, they were stupid. It was a word that he used over and over and over, dope and stupid.
And the masses?
They were stupid.
As a part of the war effort, the US government set up a Committee on Public Information, and Bernays was employed to promote America's war aims in the press. The President, Woodrow Wilson, had announced that the United States would fight not to restore the old empires, but to bring democracy to all of Europe. Bernays proved extremely skillful in promoting this idea, both at home and abroad. And at the end of the war, he was asked to accompany the President to the Paris Peace Conference.
Then, to my surprise, they asked me to go over with Woodrow Wilson to the peace conference. And at the age of 26, I was in Paris for the entire time of the peace conference that was held in the suburb of Paris, and we worked to make the world safe for democracy. That was a big slogan.
Wilson's reception in Paris astounded Bernays and the other American propagandists. Their propaganda had portrayed Wilson as a liberator of the people, a man who would create a new world in which the individual would be free. They had made him a hero of the masses. And as he watched the crowd surge around Wilson, Bernays began to wonder whether it would be possible to do the same type of mass persuasion, but in peacetime.
Liberty is based on individual freedom. We are individual people. We are not the mass, so disdainfully referred to by Karl Marx and the socialist writers. The goals then, very simply stated, are to make the world over into a one world, new world order dictatorship controlled utterly and completely by this Committee of 300. How can they possibly carry out their goals? That's the next question that I'm often asked. They do it by dint and by virtue of their fantastic wealth, and the fact that they control thousands of the top banking institutions, the political organizations. So the goals are a one-world dictatorship of the most brutal kind, and how they carry it out is they have these interface banks, insurance companies, mining conglomerates, every conceivable control in politics. And the British East India Company was the most powerful trading company in the world. They made their massive monies out of the dope trade. They first grew prime poppies in Kew Gardens in Kensington, London, got the best producing opium poppies. They then shipped them to Benares in India, where they began a massive plantation of poppies, opium producing poppies. They then used their famous tea clippers to transport the poppies in the form of raw opium to China. And by their military force they imposed an opium policy on China that turned the Chinese nation into a nation of addicts. And they enforced this policy, which was known to the royal family and Lord Gladstone, the Prime Minister, and every one of the lords and ladies in England. And they made a massive, huge fortune